Chapter 11. Mr. Bennet found his quarry in the grove, pacing beneath a large tree and swatting at the grass with his walking stick. Once Darcy got over his shock at coming face to face with Elizabeth's father so unexpectedly, he did an admirable job in presenting his request. Mr. Bennet wished to discomfit the man, but as he watched Darcy wring the life from his hat, he relented and readily gave his permission. "I will require some time to come to terms with losing my daughter, and my wife will wish to make her good fortune known far and wide." Mr. Bennet watched the tip of his walking stick as he twirled it in a circle. "A month should suffice. Although I would wish for longer, it is doubtful that you, Lizzie, or I could tolerate Mrs. Bennet's raptures for any longer than a month." He cradled his stick in his arms, much as he did his rifle when out on a hunt. "Will Mr. Bingley be returning to Netherfield, or do you require accommodations at Longbourn?" Darcy thought there was a bit of an accusatory tone to Mr. Bennet's question. It seemed that it was not only Elizabeth who held him responsible for Bingley's departure. "I am uncertain," he replied, "but I believe he may indeed return. The outcome of his calling at the gardener's will be the deciding factor." Mr. Bennet's brows rose. "He has gone to call at the gardener's? I had not heard such. Jane is circumspect, but I would think that she would have mentioned seeing a friend such as Mr. Bingley in one of her letters." "He has only just received notice of Miss Bennet being in town," said Darcy. "I have not had a reply, nor has Miss Elizabeth had word from her sister, so I am uncertain if the call has taken place or what the results of the call have been." He turned to Mr. Bennet. "Had I known that Miss Bennet was in town, or that she had called on Bingley's sisters, I would have informed Mr. Bingley of her presence much sooner. However, I only just discovered this information when I arrived in Kent." Mr. Bennet's lips puckered and relaxed as his brows drew together in question. Darcy shifted uneasily under the man's scrutiny. "When we left Netherfield, I thought Miss Bennet indifferent, and cautioned my friend against forming too deep an attachment." He sighed. "Miss Elizabeth assures me I was wrong," he grimaced. "And from the melancholy I have observed in my friend, my warning came too late as it was." One corner of Mr. Bennet's mouth tipped upwards in a half-smile. So my wife's raptures might not be confined only to Elizabeth's conquest of a wealthy gentleman? Darcy shook his head and chuckled slightly. "Mrs. Bennet may indeed be doubly delighted, but I cannot guarantee it." Very good indeed." Mr. Bennet's smile grew wide. "I must request one more thing of you for my wife's sake." "Whatever you wish," said Darcy. Mr. Bennet smirked. "I could be requesting something very nearly impossible." "Whatever you ask, if it is in my power to provide it, I will," Darcy assured him. Mr. Bennet's smile softened, and Darcy was surprised to see understanding in the gentleman's eyes. "You love my Lizzie dearly, do you not?" Darcy felt his ears and cheeks grow warm. He had admitted his love for Elizabeth to Elizabeth and even to his aunt and cousins without much uneasiness, but admitting it to her father was somewhat more disquieting. "More than life itself, sir," he answered softly. Mr. Bennet swallowed and blinked against the tears that wished to fall. It was all for which he had wished for his Lizzie, to be loved completely. "For some of us, such a thing is not easily admitted," he said, as he looked behind him, down the path he had taken from the parsonage. "She is special to me. In a way her sisters are not, so it does my heart good to hear that she will be loved as she deserves. It is still not easy to part with her, of course." "I shall likely feel the same," Darcy said, "when I have to part with my sister." Mr. Bennet nodded slowly. "You wish for their happiness, you know." "I do," Darcy agreed. Mr. Bennet stood silently for a moment longer before turning around and continuing on his walk with Mr. Darcy. "To my request," he began, "my wife would be greatly pleased if you were to marry by special licence." This request was speedily agreed to, and Mr. Bennet was petitioned that, after her time in Kent was up, Elizabeth be allowed to stay longer in town than first planned. There was a need to introduce Elizabeth, not only to his sister, but also to his uncle, Lord Matlock. As Mr. Bennet saw it, it was wise for both Darcy and Elizabeth to know if their marriage would meet with approbation or displeasure while they were still preparing for life as a married couple, and so he agreed. He would stop at the gardener's on his return to Longbourn and inform them of the change and the reason. And so it transpired that after Darcy's time in Kent was at an end, he returned to London to share the news of his betrothal with his sister and his uncle. Shortly thereafter, Elizabeth joined him in town for a grand dinner party in her honour. So grand was this party, and so happy the occasion, that it necessitated the presence of Lady Catherine and Anne. The Gardiners were also invited, as were Mr. Bingley and Jane. Fortunately, the week prior to this soirée, indeed before the invitations had arrived, the Hursts, with Caroline in tow, had removed to a small estate in the country, to visit a friend with a cousin of marriageable age and fortune. Therefore, it was a companionable group that met that evening at Darcy House. The dining room was set with its finest, and not a surface that could hold a shine was dim. All was to be presented at its best for the new mistress. "What do you think of Darcy House?" Darcy asked Elizabeth as they slipped out the door to the terrace. "It is very grand." Elizabeth turned to look at the house from the bottom of the garden steps. "It is beautiful." She smiled and chuckled. "I fear I will not do it justice, for I am merely tolerable, and it is so handsome." She turned laughing eyes toward Darcy. Over the days they had spent at Rosings, they had fallen into an easy friendship. It had started that afternoon in the music room when the blinders of prejudice had been removed, and it had continued through each walk in the groves, ride in the countryside, and afternoon and evening spent in each other's company. Elizabeth had found Darcy to be a person with whom she could share a great camaraderie. They had discussed a great number of topics, from preferences of seasons and plants, to books and politics, to family and dreams and wishes for the future. Not every topic had been delved into with any degree of depth as to think it thoroughly canvassed, but it had been touched in such a way as to assure the pair that they were indeed companionably matched. That is not to say, of course, that either one or the other would not on some point or another be unwilling to shift their opinion, but on the important matters of life and love they were in almost unanimous agreement. Darcy shook his head and, taking her hand, led her down a path, away from the room filled with people and the few who were enjoying the coolness of the evening on the terrace. "Will you ever forget those words?" he asked. "It is unlikely," she said with a laugh. "They are untrue, you know." He pulled her close to his side. "You're definitely handsome enough to tempt me." He leaned closer to her ear and added in a whisper, "Beyond reason." It was a statement that he had proven with ardent kisses at least once per day while at Rosings. Elizabeth blushed and ducked her head. She was still not entirely at ease with this new, complimentary Mr. Darcy, parrying and dodging quips, refuting arguments, and challenging ideas were Elizabeth's natural bent when it came to engaging others in conversation. Having to speak of one's inner desires and feelings was more challenging, but it was something to which she was slowly growing accustomed. For all of her life, there had only been one person with whom she shared such thoughts, Jane. But now that role would be filled, as it had been during the last portion of her stay in Kent, by Mr. Darcy, her husband. That word, husband, made her stomach flop, and a skitter of delight race up her spine. "Have I silenced you?" There was laughter in Darcy's tone. "I am afraid you have," said Elizabeth, glancing up at him and giving him a small smile. "Husband," she said the word once more in her mind, and the excited delight of a moment ago slid into a welcome comforting feeling that wrapped around her heart tightly. How she had ever doubted that it was something other than love for the man beside her, that longed for his presence and good opinion, she was unsure. It was stubbornness, she supposed, or naivety, or just plain fear of the heretofore unfamiliar. She had never been in love. It was not something which had been explained in books or described with adequacy by any friend or relation. She credited this to the fact that love was so individual. To Jane, it was a happiness of heart. To Aunt Gardiner, it was a comfortable companion. To Charlotte, it was security for her future. To Elizabeth, it was all these things, but more, something far deeper than those explanations had ever suggested. It was a mingling of one heart and soul with another, mixed and twisted in such a way that the two would never be separated. Darcy watched her tilt her head, knowing she was thinking of a reply, and therefore waited patiently in silence. "Do you remember," Elizabeth began, "how you told me the first evening we were in company at Rosings, when I was playing the piano and I was teasing you about your behaviour in Hertfordshire, that you do not have the ability to speak as easily to people as others do?" Darcy nodded. "I do." Elizabeth drew a breath, a deep, chest-expanding breath, and then released it slowly. She knew it must be done. She must speak of her heart to him, no matter how strange it might feel. In 3 days' time, they would leave London and its relative peace for the loudness of Longbourn. She was uncertain if her mother would allow space for Elizabeth to draw breath, let alone contemplate and ruminate on something so important as love. "We will find time for walks in Hertfordshire, will we not?" She could not bear the idea of quiet moments such as this being entirely removed from her. There was nothing so soothing as a stroll at Mr. Darcy's side. "I will insist upon it." Darcy smiled down at her. "I cannot survive without some degree of solitude. It is necessary for my well-being, I assure you." "Good," said Elizabeth as a small weight lifted from her. "You know how dearly I love a solitary walk." "I do." Again she drew a breath, though not quite as great as the last one. "I do not know where to begin," she said at last. "So much has changed in such a short time." She peeked up and saw him nod his agreement. "Before you left Rosings, I thought I might be caught up in the newness of our situation. I thought that I craved your presence because you were—" She paused as if unsure of what she was about to say. "I was not your cousin," he supplied. Her smile at his comment caused her eyes to sparkle and his heart to flutter. "You are so beautiful," he whispered. She ducked her head again, but her smile did not diminish. "Yes, you are sensible, unlike my cousin." He chuckled. "I shall remind you of that when you're put out with me." She nudged him with her shoulder. "As I was saying, I thought I craved your presence because you were sensible. I thought I enjoyed your company because you'd become a friend." She peeked up at him again. "And you have become a friend. But it is more." She stopped walking and turned to face him. She knew she must look at him, while she said the words that had echoed in her mind and heart since the day her father gave her permission to marry the man in front of her. She would see his eyes as she said those words that she had questioned and contemplated. She would watch his face when she finally admitted those words that had befuddled her and had slowly drawn her into accepting their truth. "Rosings shall always have a dear place in my heart," she said, "for it is where I discovered you first, in a locked bedroom." She could not resist the urge to lift a teasing brow, and he chuckled. Somehow that low, rumbling sound made it easier for her to continue. "And then, in my heart, I love you." Her lips curled into a smile and her eyes glistened with happy tears. "Most ardently," she added, "and I will continue to love you with my dying breath." Darcy's lips parted, and then slid into the most endearing smile Elizabeth had ever seen, for it not only curved his mouth but shone on his face and beamed from his eyes. It was joy, pure joy. "You love me?" She nodded. "I do. I do not know how it happened," she admitted, "or precisely when, but I love you." Darcy gave no thought to the people who might come upon him and Elizabeth as they stood in the garden. Nor did he think about those who might be watching from the house. He did not even consider the teasing that would come from Richard, about the poor example he was setting for Georgiana. He only knew that Elizabeth loved him, and that such a declaration demanded he take her in his arms, which he did. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around his neck, and wove her fingers through his hair as she returned his kiss. This was where she wished to remain. Here, with this man who loved her completely, and whom she knew would always hold her heart